gentlemen, and welcome to the first in a four-part webinar series known as Ask the Land Promoter. Rosconn Strategic Land are teaming up with Farmers Weekly to provide with you an insightful journey through the land promotion process for you to have a greater understanding of what land promoters do. My name's Dan O'Donnell. I am the founder of Rosconn Strategic Land. This afternoon, I'm delighted to be accompanied by my colleagues, Nick Carr, Operations Director, and Dan Hatcher, our Planning Director. We'll be answering some of those wonderful questions that you've been sending in, and those that aren't answered this afternoon will be answered offline, so don't worry, do keep them coming through. We're delighted to have had 263 registrations already, and we're delighted to welcome such a large audience. There's going to be two poll questions this afternoon, one of which will be getting pushed out shortly, and the results of which will be provided after a presentation. The second poll question will then be released, and the results will be provided partway through the question answering session. We'd now like to run you through a brief presentation about land promotion and Rosconn Strategic Land. Rosconn Strategic Land is a land promotion company that differentiates itself in a number of ways. We're privately owned and privately funded by myself. We operate in a trustworthy and transparent manner. We have a dynamic and experienced team that are able to be nimble and quick with decision making when the opportunity arises. We have a proven track record of delivering difficult residential-led planning permissions, and we have testimonials on demand. We ensure that all sites are sold from maximised value to ensure landowner achieves as much as possible for their asset. The landowner receives a genuinely bespoke land promotion package. Some of you will be asking, what is a land promotion agreement? A residential land promotion agreement is when a land promoter, such as Rosconn Strategic Land, agrees to promote land on behalf of the landowner. Works associated with the land promotion process are undertaken at no financial cost to the landowner and rest solely at the financial risk of the land promoter. At its very essence, it's a contract between a landowner and a land promoter that sets out to achieve a maximised return for the landowner, with both parties' objectives being aligned. Working with a land promoter provides the landowner access to expert knowledge and expertise of the land promoter's planning and technical team, thus ensuring their asset achieves its fullest potential. Some of you will be asking, what are the key advantages of a promotion agreement? Firstly, there's no financial risk. All costs associated with the promotion process rest at the door of the land promoter. It avoids the landowner having to personally deal with the complexities of the planning system. And as my colleague Dan can assure you, the planning system is indeed complex. The price is determined by transparent marketing at the point that the land asset has achieved its planning permission and the land is competitively tendered. The landowner and promoter's objectives are aligned. We're working to the same goal. The promoter is incentivized to deliver a return on your land. Our promotion fee is linked to your sale price. We want the land to sell for as much as possible. The role of land promoters in the delivery of housing. Well, as a group, land promoters are the largest group of businesses supporting planning for new housing. We're delivering land for new housing quickly, ensuring that delays in the planning system aren't holding up your planning permissions. We're delivering affordable housing throughout the UK. We're working with local communities and key local stakeholders to ensure we are creating sustainable communities. We're increasing the diversity in the house building industry, be that PLC house builders, SME house builders, registered providers, or even care operators. At this point, I'd like to hand over to Nick, who's going to take you through the next part of the presentation.
Thanks, Dan. So, some key things to consider. Firstly, how involved do you want to be? This really varies from landowner to landowner. Some are happy to pretty much let the promoter get on with it. Others want a much closer involvement with updates at every turn, approvals of all plans, surveys, etc. It's worth giving this some thought and making sure that the level of service offered by the promoter matches with your expectations. How will the site be marketed? This is absolutely crucial for ensuring best value. Having confidence in the promoter that they will provide a robust pack of information that de-risks the site for a house builder so far as possible is key. Also, are you wanting a closed tender to an agreed list of house builders or something more extensive, such as the sale boards, advertisements on Rightmove and within Estates Gazette? Which promoter is right for you? Planning takes a long time. Promotion agreements are often 5, 10, or even 15 years in length. When deciding which company to go for, having some confidence that you'll actually get on with the individuals in mind is really important. Promotion agreements at their best are a real team effort. Set a minimum land value. This one is really important. Any promotion agreement really should include a minimum price. Whilst the whole ethos of a promotion is to maximize value, it is important to set a base level for the price, which below which contractually you would not be obligated to sell. Do you need to reserve future rights on the retained land? If you're selling a parcel of land rather than an entire property, this one really does merit some early thought. Think about the daily farm operations. Will selling that parcel mean you no longer have road access to some of your retained land? Also, what about services? Do you need the ability to keep services in the land that is being sold? And on the same theme, might the rest of your land holding have some longer term development potential? If so, think about reserving rights for access and services for future development through the land that's being sold. If these are known about at day one, it can be fairly straightforward to plan into a development, but potentially not possible once planning permission has been achieved. So as I say, the sooner the better on this point. Moving on to the next slide, our land promotion process explained. It's hopefully helpful now to talk you through how the land promotion process typically works. One big caveat here, all sites are different and often agreements are entered into where an application is not expected for several years. This is particularly the case with Greenbelt land. Here, there is an extra step of promotion through a local plan, which can be a lengthy process. The example below is on the basis of an agreement being entered into where planning permission can be applied for straight away. The starting point, or certainly pre-COVID, is that what you would meet with the promoter and possibly your land agent to discuss the opportunity, get a feel for them as a company and as individuals, and provided you're comfortable, agree terms. It's then over to the lawyers to document what has been agreed between the parties in the form of a formal promotion agreement. From there, it's a case of undertaking survey works on the site, and I'll talk you through these in a bit more detail on the next slide in a few moments. Once you've got an early evidence base, we would then look to start engaging with the local authority. This provides an opportunity to scope out what is going to be required with the planning application and to flag any early concerns that the authority may have. As we progress work on the planning application, community engagement is very useful. This is something we like to be hands-on with, and it would typically include meetings with the parish council, a consultation event with the local community, and dialogue with ward councillors. Ideally, this becomes an ongoing process with the local community helping to shape the scheme as you edge towards the planning application being submitted. Factoring in the pre-app, this community engagement would then look to refine the master plan and accompanying surveys before the planning application is submitted. From starting survey work to submission of an application would typically take 4 to 8 months, but it really does vary depending on the scale and the complexities of the site. It's then over to the local authority to determine the application. The target for this on any scheme over 10 dwellings is 13 weeks. The reality, though, is that this is likely to take significantly longer, even with the benefit of pre-app. Assuming permission is granted, it's then on with marketing the site. If it's not, it's time for a pause for thought, to review the reason for refusal and to determine the best way forward, which could be to lodge an appeal against the decision or to resubmit a revised application. For marketing, we look to agree a marketing strategy with the owner. How long is the tender process? And who is being provided details of the site are some of the key points of consideration. We then send out a detailed pack of information, and offers are generally received 4 to 6 weeks later. Typically, we would then interview the 3 or so best offers for the site, and if everything stacks up, a decision is made as to who to treat with. It's back then to the lawyers once more, where the sale contract and transfer are negotiated ahead of an exchange and legal completion of the sale to a house builder. On to the next slide, and I'll very briefly touch upon the surveys that we would typically commission for a residential development. I won't go through every survey listed below, but the slides will be available to view afterwards. These would include a transport assessment detailing how the site is accessed, but also crucially how the scheme may impact upon existing traffic within a settlement. Landscape and urban design will include developing the master plan for the site, with the starting point being the scheme's impact on the existing landscape of the area. A flood risk assessment will accompany the site to assess any possible flooding issues, as well as setting out how surface and foul water are to be dealt with. Ecology will start with a preliminary ecological survey to assess the site's suitability as a habitat for a range of species, and from there it's likely that further survey work would be necessary, such as for bats and reptiles. These can also provide the starting point for ensuring that a development achieves a net gain in terms of biodiversity. Moving on, a ground investigation will be undertaken, typically ahead of the site being marketed. This will provide information on the type of ground present on site, to enable foundation design, as well as to check any possible contamination and access and to assess whether soakways for drainage are viable. This list is by no means exhaustive, and there will be further site-specific surveys such as heritage assessments, archaeological digs, noise surveys, air quality surveys, depending on site specifics. I'll now hand you over to Dan Hatcher, who will provide you with a couple of case study examples.
Thank you, Nick, and good afternoon, everyone. Securing planning permission on a site is a critical part of the land promotion process. It is complex and subject to an ever-changing planning policy framework at both national and local level, as well as legal, political, and environmental issues, which can often change or arise without warning throughout the process. However, once secured, planning permission for residential creates a significant uplift in the value of land, making it far more attractive to a house builder, as the riskiest part of the process has been resolved. The following 3 case studies will hopefully help show you how we guide landowners through the process in order to maximise the value of their land. The first case study is a scheme we brought forward at Grays Hill on the edge of Bedford in Bedfordshire. Here, a landowner had made some progress in promoting his own land by securing a draft allocation in the emerging plan for 100 dwellings. However, he had become frustrated with the process and recognised that ensuring the site remained as an allocation in the final adopted plan, and then to secure planning permission, would be a costly and time-consuming process, and he therefore decided he needed help. Rosconn were one of several land promoters approached by the landowner, and after several interviews, he decided to appoint us as his preferred development partner. We immediately set to work by completing a comprehensive suite of surveys and a fresh concept plan to demonstrate how a much greater level of development could be accommodated on the site in order to challenge the council's position. A pre-application meeting was subsequently arranged with the council, and support was secured in principle for a proposal of 165 dwellings. We also fully engaged with the local community, presenting our proposals to 2 parish councils, and we held a public exhibition to enable residents to feedback on the emerging scheme. This enabled us to identify all relevant issues and amend our scheme as necessary, an essential stage in helping to minimise the level of opposition once a planning application is submitted. In tandem, we continue to promote the site through the emerging local plan, agreeing a statement of common ground with the council to demonstrate to the inspector examining the local plan that our aspirations for the site were fully aligned. An outline planning application was then subsequently submitted and permission was granted in November 2020. This included an agreed design code to ensure that the subsequent house builders' detailed plans achieved a high standard of design. The site was sold to Mulberry Homes the following month, following an extensive and open marketing campaign despite the ongoing pandemic, much to the joy and relief of our landowner. As well as securing a significant increase in the quantum of development than originally envisaged, the scheme will also deliver over £3.4 million worth of improvements to local services and facilities, benefiting the wider community. The second case study was a site at Langford in central Bedfordshire. Rosconn approached two adjoining landowners in the village, having identified through our in-house research team that the land has significant development potential. Whilst the land had no current status and was not supported by the current local plan, this was now out of date and a new plan was some distance from being adopted. In the interim, due to the council having a shortfall in its housing land supply, Rosconn knew that national policy required the council to look favourably on any speculative application at this site. The landowners subsequently entered into a promotion agreement with us, recognising the immediate opportunity we had identified. We quickly mobilised our consultant team to work up a planning application whilst undertaking community engagement prior to lodging the application. After working through a number of technical issues raised by consultees and local residents, we secured a positive recommendation from the planning officer. But after a deferral at the first committee, the application was refused at the second committee due to concerns about construction traffic harming the amenity of local residents. By this time, we knew that the new local plan was at an advanced stage and did not allocate the site for housing. Tactically, we therefore decided to fast-track an appeal via the written representations procedure. Whilst this is not as forensic as a formal hearing or a public inquiry, we were confident that the reason for refusal was straightforward and that we could secure a decision before the local plan was adopted. The appeal decision was indeed delivered prior to the new plan being adopted, the inspector agreeing with our case and granting planning permission for 95 dwellings. The community also benefited from an additional £1.4 million being invested locally to upgrade services and facilities. The site was sold to Bloor Homes, who have now secured detailed permission, and construction will start later this year. The final case study relates to a site in Honeybourne in Worcestershire. We were initially approached by a local surveyor acting for the landowners to see if we would be interested in promoting his client's land, which at the time had no planning status. Whilst the local plan for the area was up to date and the council had a healthy housing land supply, we recognised that the land was suitable for development, and I identified an opportunity to promote was imminent in that the local community was about to prepare a neighbourhood development plan for its village, which can allocate sites for housing. On this basis, we entered into a promotion agreement with the landowners and immediately set to work in commissioning surveys and developing an initial concept plan for the site. We then arranged an initial meeting with the neighbourhood plan steering group to introduce ourselves and explain how our development could help achieve the village's aspirations to meet local housing needs. The meeting was positive and initiated a series of further meetings, helping to build trust and enabling us to evolve the scheme and address any technical concerns and aligned with local community objectives. Our scheme was then presented alongside several other proposals around the village by the parish council, the outcome of which was a clear preference for our scheme by the local people. The site was then draft allocated in the plan and was subject to public consultation before the plan was adopted in spring 2020. A planning application followed in June 2020, and by December we had secured outline planning permission for 65 dwellings and completed the sale to Owl Homes. £1.66 million worth of contributions were also secured towards improvements to services and facilities in the local area. That finishes my case studies. Thank you for listening, and I'll now hand back to Dan.
Sorry to interrupt, Dan, but you're on mute.
Well, I don't think we would be in this new world without somebody saying you're on mute. But thanks, Nick. And if it was going to be one of the three of us, it was going to be me. We all know that. So as I was saying, or I thought I was saying to you all, we've had the results in from the first poll. And it makes interesting reading. I don't know, Nick, what yourself and Dan think, but 83% of the respondents have said maximizing your financial return, which is fair to say is overwhelming. 6.7% speed of return, 6.7% quality of development, and 3.6% community benefits. What do we think about that? Okay, so
I mean, that's very interesting. If I'm honest, probably surprised it's quite as high as that. Shows we've got the right strapline for the business in terms of maximising return, which is encouraging. No, so, I think it's interesting.
I think that's right. I wasn't sure the number would be as high. As you know, I've always felt maximising return is important to landowners, and it's fair to say that the survey result has shown that to be the case. We're shortly going to be pushing out the second poll, so please do interact with that. It's going to be interesting to see the results of the second poll. We're moving on now to the question and answer session, where we get around to answering some of the wonderful questions you've been asking. And Catherine, you have asked, how is it best to choose a suitable promoter for getting planning permission on my land? I think I'd like to take this one. It's a combination in terms of finding a suitable promoter. I mean, in terms of identifying a promoter, you might have seen them advertising within the rural press. They may have approached you directly by letter or arriving up at the farm. It may well be that your landowner advisor, your surveyor, your rural surveyor has a list of suitable land promoters that they feel would be the right fit for you. I always think choosing a land promoter, or why we as Rosconn Strategic Land often get chosen, it's down to the personalities, it's down to the personal touch, it's down to the client care. In truth, it's down to a lot of the testimonials that other surveyors and landowner professionals that have travelled the Rosconn journey provide us with, and they're live testimonials whereby landowners can call them, and indeed call the landowners that have travelled the Rosconn journey. So I think that's always important, to get testimonials and references, but it comes down to who do you feel comfortable with. And another key point, if I were a landowner that I would be considering, how long's the team been together? Is there going to be longevity and continuity of the team? If you look at our setup here at Rosconn, Nick has been with the business now for 14 years. That's a rare commodity indeed. Hopefully that's answered your question. Question 2, this is coming from William. William, you're asking, we have some edge of village permanent pasture, which might well get planning permission if handled correctly. Is that right? This sounds like a question for Dan Hatcher.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, I think it's always a good start if your land is well located, i.e., next to an existing settlement. So I think that's always a good start. Obviously, it's difficult to comment on a specific site, but I think there are a lot of factors to take into consideration, and that's obviously what we do day in, day out. It's a number of things that we look at. Obviously, from a planning point of view, it's looking at what existing policies say about the land in and around that village. You look at how sustainable that settlement is in terms of the range of facilities within it, like primary schools, healthcare, retail, bus services, etc. So you have to weigh up all these things and then look at other things like environmental constraints, listed buildings, for instance, or floodplains. So you have to do a complete assessment. Obviously, any site that we take on, we undertake a full assessment of all of these issues, and obviously ground conditions. I mean, the list is quite significant, but we, as part of our due diligence, we will look at all of those issues and determine whether any sort of major showstoppers or things that can be mitigated as part of the planning process. So, as I say, I can't comment on the individual circumstances, but I think Dan will mention later on that we are offering a free planning appraisal on sites for Farmers Weekly listeners, readers. So, obviously, Dan will tell you more about that at the end of the presentation.
Thanks, Dan. Question 3 has come in from Helen. Helen, you're asking, what's the minimum area you would consider acting on for farmyard and adjoining greenfield sites? How is your commission factored in? What is the initial procedure to assess if a feasible project? So it's a 3-part question, and as we know at Rosconn, 3-part questions usually go to Nick Carr. Nick, over to you.
Thank you, Dan. Yeah, nice, easy, straightforward one with various bits to unpick. Could I just double check the second bit, because the connection just went slightly there? It was how is our commission factored in? Is that right? How is
our commission factored in, and what is the initial procedure to assess if it's a feasible project?
Perfect, thank you. So yes, minimum site size really does vary depending on site capacity and also values in the area. If you've got a perfectly flat site with not too much in the way of sensitivities such as landscape, heritage, etc., the capacity might therefore be higher. And similarly, if values are very high in the area in terms of house price values, that will correlate to land values being higher, which may mean that the actual site size could be a bit smaller. I'd say general rule of thumb, but it is, as I emphasize, site specific, probably about 4 acres, but could be lower or higher depending on site specifics. And then the next one I think was commission, and that would be, it's a percentage of the net sale proceeds, so after all costs. So we cover all of the costs of getting planning permission, planning application fees, technical survey work, etc. And then once site's marketed, the site's sale proceeds are received, we get a net percentage, and again that's very much on a site specific basis depending on a number of factors, including risk being foremost, and also again size of development, but it is a percentage of the net sale proceeds. And one of the beauties of that is it incentivizes us to maximize the return for the landowner, returning to the theme of the earlier poll question. And then I think on the last point, with the procedure that we undertake, I think Dan has covered that pretty well in his last answer. But yeah, just to add, we look at various technical constraints, also things like the planning history on a site, and also settlement, and then also what's the planning policy context in a local authority. Are they just about to start work on a local plan that then perhaps provides us with an immediate opportunity to be promoting the site through a local plan? Or have they just adopted a plan and have got a very healthy land supply position, which means perhaps the site's a slightly longer term? But they're some of the things that we would start to look at as a starting point.
Thanks, Nick. Question 4 has come in from Stuart. Stuart, you're asking, would we promote some land that has previously had planning permission refused? It's a great question, and it deserves a great answer, and that one's going to come from Nick.
Thank you. Never say never is what I would say as a starting point. I think interesting, an important consideration is at what level was it refused? Is that a local level refusal or an appeal? The relevance being that appeals are harder to overcome than a local level permission because they've gone to that next level, and if you've got an inspector who's come down against the site, that can be more challenging. In the words of one of our esteemed planning consultants, appeal decisions cast a long shadow over sites, but it does come down to the site specifics of that case. one of the big questions I'd always have is what has changed. So it might have had an appeal decision in the past that hasn't gone favourably, but what's changed in the intervening period? There might be a new local plan in place, there might be a housing deficit, there might be a site built out next door, for example, that's changed the landscape over and above when it was originally considered. By coincidence, actually, this afternoon with a colleague, we'd been introduced to a site that had been dismissed previously at appeal on heritage grounds, and that in truth, it does make life very difficult. There was a listed building right next to the site, and it was concluded that there was harm to the setting of that building, and in that context, it's pretty challenging. But there might be other scenarios, such as a technical point on highways that is seen as oversurmountable. It might be it's gone in for a quantum of development, and the inspector or the local authorities just felt that that's a little bit too much. So a slight reduction in density, a slight reorientation of the open space, etc., could address the concerns. So very much site specifics. What I would say is it's certainly not uncommon to receive agent introductions, land owner and land agent introductions with sites that have had a bit of negative history. So I wouldn't give up, put it that way.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say, Nick, we've received a few of those in the past.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's also worth saying that just to finish off on that point, that each promoter, I mean, we're speaking our own experience. Yeah, I'm sure the audience would struggle to believe it, but there are other land promoters, and they'd have different bars and different levels of criteria when deciding whether to take a site on.
That's right, Nick. There are other promoters, clearly not as friendly as Rosconn Strategic Land. Question 5's coming from David. My land is located in the Greenbelt. Does this mean it can never be built on? Dan, I know you like Greenbelt. One for you.
Sure. Yeah. No, I think it's sometimes a bit of a difficult concept to understand, because not all greenfield land is Greenbelt. Greenbelt tends to be areas around major urban areas such as London and Birmingham and other major settlement cities, where effectively there's a donut of land that's designated around those cities to stop them sprawling into and coalescing with other settlements nearby. And it's quite an old policy designation dating back to the 40s, I think, and it covers about 12% of England in terms of Greenbelt. It is much harder to get planning permission within the Greenbelt. That's without doubt. But there are authorities that are wholly within Greenbelt, and they don't have any other option when they are preparing their local plan but to release Greenbelt land in order to meet their housing needs. So that is probably the best way of trying to get land released from the Greenbelt for development, through a local plan review. So that only happens maybe every 5 years, but the best option is to promote your land through the local plan, because ultimately in an authority where it's 100% Greenbelt, they've got no option but to release Greenbelt land. It's just which part of the Greenbelt is least sensitive, and that's the approach they will generally take. There are other ways of getting development on Greenbelt without going through the local plan review. There are exceptions to Greenbelt policy, and that could be, for instance, where you've got a brownfield site that may have existing buildings on it that are dilapidated, such as a commercial building, or we've recently dealt with a redundant riding school in the Greenbelt, so it was classed as a brownfield development, and we were successful in securing permission to redevelop it for, I think it was about 17 houses in the end. But basically there are restrictions on what you can put in its place. So it's based on the volume of the existing buildings on site. That's the general principle. So you have to work within the volume and the height of those existing buildings. But effectively, that's one of the ways through. Another way is looking at rural exception sites. So schemes that are generally 100% affordable housing. So effectively housing brought forward by a registered provider. You may be able to get an exception in the Greenbelt. Again, it's still quite difficult, but it's a slightly easier route. If you can demonstrate there's a local housing need in an area that's wholly Greenbelt and there are no other options, then then that might be another way of getting through. So, but yeah, it's definitely more difficult. We've got a number of Greenbelt sites within our portfolio. I guess the only thing I'd say or add to that is you just have to be patient. It takes a long time. So hopefully that answers your question.
That's great, Dan. Question 6 has come in from James. James, you're asking, how is the residential land promotion route transparent? James, I'd like to take this one. In terms of the transparency of a promotion agreement, the key thing to remember is that the landowner and promoter are working together. We're working to the same goal. Therefore, the planning strategy is approved. The indicative project costs are approved and monitored. They're capped. And we can talk later. Another question that's come in is about planning costs and caps and etc. It's the continual updates that you as landowner receive from the promoter, and those can be as regular as in some cases during intense periods of the planning process. They can be daily, weekly, but more typically monthly and quarterly. And those are with yourself and your advisors. In terms of transparency, one of the key considerations for a landowner in achieving maximum value is to ensure that the eventual price paid is as much as possible. Well, the competitive tendering process that happens once planning permission is being achieved is absolutely fundamental to this. Landowners' solicitors are involved in the putting the promotion agreement in place, but they're also involved in the sale process in conjunction with the promoter's solicitors. Again, all parties working to a common goal. And one key factor in terms of transparency is your own advisors, your rural surveyor, your solicitor, on some occasions, your accountant. They will be monitoring the performance of the promoter. So, for example, Rosconn Strategic Land will be under key performance indicators. We need to hit key milestones. There's key checkpoints throughout the agreement that we have to hit for the agreement to stay live. Hopefully, James, that's answered your question. Hopefully not in a too long-winded fashion. Emma, you're asking, do you have any suggestions or tips if I want to promote land for development myself? Emma, excellent question. Nick, I'll give this one to you.
Thank you. I'll try and be quick because I'm conscious that the questions are backing up from the audience, which is good. So I'll be nice and succinct if possible. Don't would be my honest advice. But probably in all seriousness, I think probably the two key things are deep pockets and also a willingness to take risk if it's something that you're wanting to take on yourself. Certainly not trying to put you off, but a strong constitution on nerves of steel would be helpful as well, because there's a lot of risk and money out prior to actually achieving planning permission. One of, I think, a big trend that we've seen in recent years is archaeological trial trenching predetermination. So you've got sites where in advance of planning permission being decided, the local authorities, archaeologist, conservation officer is keen for predetermination trial trenching to be undertaken on a site, which can run to several thousands of pounds completely at risk, and that's along with all other costs associated with obtaining a permission. But if you do feel it is for you, then I think probably the two key things I would suggest are a really good quality land agent, owner advisor that you trust, and also an excellent planning consultant, and with those two they can hopefully help steer you through the process.
That's great, Nick. That's great. Question 8 is coming from Mark. Mark, you're asking, what added value is a promoter bringing? Well, this is definitely a question for me. Value add, interesting one. Honest approach. Highly experienced team, the fact that the promoter funds the entire process, access to best-in-class consultants to assist with the planning process, excellent track record of delivering difficult residential-led planning permissions and achieving unconditional land sales rather than lengthy conditional arrangements. Again, one of the key considerations that I touched on earlier in terms of the competitive tendering process, we find on average spread of bids between highest and lowest bid that the house builders put forward when they're putting their bids in is 50%. On average, 50%. The highest we've ever had is 100% spread in bids differential, and they're all looking at the same pack of information. Therefore, the value add that a promoter brings by obtaining the planning permission, dealing with the difficult technical intricacies that each site has and legal issues will ensure that you receive a best-in-class maximised return. Well, the results are in from our second poll. And we asked, do you think you have land that is suitable for development? 38.2%, I do like being exact, 38.2% is definitely, 29.4% possibly, 17.6% no, and 14.7% don't know. So yeah, makes interesting reading. Guys, do we have any observations on those at all?
Probably the standout observation is for the 38.2%. Please do get in touch. So I think, yeah, as Dan H has already mentioned, we do at no cost to anybody undertake an initial appraisal on site. So if you do think you've got land that's suitable for development, please do send that through.
Nick, you took the words out of my mouth. Question 9's come in from Tony. Tony, you're asking, my village is intending to prepare a neighbourhood development plan. I'm not sure how best to put my land forward for consideration, so how could you help? Tony, we love neighbourhood development plan sites at Rosconn, and the man who is expert in this field is Dan Hatcher. Dan, over to you.
Yes, sure. Yeah. No, we have we've done quite a few successful promotions of land through emerging neighbourhood plans. I think one of the examples that I mentioned earlier at Honeybourne was just that. Really, I think the key issue is obviously your land needs to be suitable first and foremost. So again, that goes back to the assessments that we do to make sure that it ticks all the right boxes. It's adjacent to the settlements. The settlement's got good facilities. The other thing you need to establish is the neighbourhood plan looking to allocate a site or sites for housing, because a number of them won't and a number of them will. So it's a matter of establishing whether they intend to allocate land to meet their housing needs. I'd say probably the key thing is to engage as early as possible in that process, make it clear to the people that are driving this plan forward that you have land that is suitable, and make sure that they know you are willing to promote it and for residential purposes. So you've got to be in it to win it. Effectively, make sure you're on the register of sites that are available and for consideration. I think then it's about. I mean, in terms of our approach, it's very much about doing that technical work early to demonstrate to the plan makers that there are no constraints, and things like highways, can you get a suitable access and visibility into the site? Can you, are there any great crested newts or any sort of other protected species on site? So we do all those surveys up front to make sure that there are no sort of insurmountable constraints that would preclude development on the site. Once you've got all that information, you can demonstrate clearly to the plan makers that there are no constraints, the land is suitable, and present that information along with ideally a sort of a concept plan to show a vision for the site. I think that's a really good start to the process, but I think it's early engagement and it's ongoing engagement and making sure you respond at each consultation stage through the process, so that people listen to what you're saying. And I guess always I would look for professional representation, or obviously get someone like us to be involved in the process to guide you through it, because we have a lot of experience.
That's great, Dan. And question 10 has come in from John. John, you're asking, does it cost a lot to instruct the solicitor to deal with a land promotion agreement? Simple answer to that is no, because the land promoter, i.e. Rosconn Strategic Land, we're going to undertake the reasonable legal fees of your solicitor. That's for putting the agreement in place. If there are any changes or amendments to the promotion agreement during the life of the promotion agreement, we're picking up those costs. In terms of the what's called a Section 106 agreement, the legal agreement that binds the landowner and developer promoter to the various contributions that get made as part of the community benefits, there will be a cost to that, which again, the promoter will cover. So, John, perhaps very succinctly, I could have said no, but just wanted to give you some background there. Fundamentally, all your costs are undertaken by the promoter. Question 11 has come from George. George, you're asking, why don't I just sign up a deal with a house builder at day one? George, there's nothing to stop you doing that. There's nothing to stop you signing up with a house builder at day one. And some people may feel that's the right thing to do for them. Clearly, as a land promotion company that maximizes land value via ensuring that it's a transparent marketing process for the house builder, for the landowner, when the house builders bid on the land post planning, we would strongly disagree with that. We suggest that you receive a far more competitive price, as I outlined earlier when I was talking about the spread of bids that comes in, the differential highest to lowest during the planning process. But also by signing up a promotion agreement with a land promoter, you're working in unison to a shared, an aligned goal. Our venture, our quest is to maximize your value. It's not to buy the land as cheap as possible, because our fee is linked to the eventual sale price. So we're working with you. So, and also one of the other benefits I think the promoters can bring, if I certainly talk about myself, it's fair to say that, I'm prepared to take relatively large financial risks on quite speculative land parcels. And therefore, I'm not alone in that. Promoters are known to be more speculative than some others within the development industry. But again, we never throw stones at house builders. We're just pointing out that in terms of maximised return, from the evidence we've seen, from the case studies that we have got on our website that you can view, to us and to many surveyors up and down the country, the evidence is very clear. Hopefully that's answered your question. Grant, you're asking, I think my land could be suitable for housing, but I'm concerned about upsetting the local community, particularly if the housing is of poor quality or doesn't fit in with the local area, like so many modern housing estates. Grant, it's an understandable concern. It's not one I'll be answering, but it is one that Dan Hatcher will be answering.
Yes, thanks, Dan. Yeah, I think this comes up quite regularly, and I think it's an issue that's becoming more and more prevalent. I know the government is pushing an agenda called Building Better, Building Beautiful. So it's recently published a national design code, which is out for consultation, and that's effectively trying to raise the standard of housing amongst others. But so I think, from our perspective, our approach when we're promoting or securing land is to secure an outline planning permission. Then the land gets sold with that outline permission to the house builder, who ultimately builds the houses and is responsible for that level of quality. I think what we do, and sometimes our landowners that we work with are very keen to ensure they're concerned about legacy and the end product. So they are very keen for us to try and set some parameters at that outline stage, although we're not setting any detailed design, because obviously a house builder wants some flexibility to build their own product. but at the same time, you can set some design standards at the outline stage, and that usually comes in the form of what's called a design code, which can be conditioned as part of the outline planning permission, and it sets sort of local design principles and characteristics that the eventual houses should look to take on, such as things like the types of materials, the architectural detailing, the form and shape of buildings and the type of windows, etc. So that can be set out as a sort of a palette of materials and construction detailing that will then force the house builder to follow, so that there is a quality product at the end of it. But I think ultimately it goes back to the local planning authority. They are the custodians. They're the sort of the design police, if you like, in terms of making sure or setting the benchmark about what the end product is. And clearly, if they don't like the ultimate design that's being put forward by a house builder and doesn't think that they've accorded with the design guide or the design code that's been set in place as part of the outline permission, then they should simply refuse the planning application. Really, it's down to the house builder to accord with the design code, and if he doesn't, then obviously the council can refuse the application, forcing them to come back with a better scheme. So I think that's the planning system, and that's what should happen. But I think the standards are getting higher and higher in terms of the quality because of what's coming out of central government in terms of raising the bar in terms of building design. So hopefully that addresses that point.
Thanks, Dan. We've got a couple of three more questions, which we're going to try and get through quite quickly because we're coming at the end of our webinar. Question 13, Sarah, you've asked, how long does it take to get planning permission? Dan, can I give this one to you, please?
Yeah, I think the simple answer there is how long is a piece of string? Obviously, there are so many factors that go into a scheme. You could have one site that's allocated in a local plan, so the principle is established, and all you're doing is just establishing or dealing with the technical issues. You might be starting with a site that's got no status, and you've got a lot of things to get over, not least the principle of housing on the site. So, or you might be having to promote a site through a local plan, which could take several years before you even get to the stage of submitting a planning application. So I think it's difficult to say what the average is. I guess I would say probably an average would be maybe 4 to 6 months to get a planning permission or an outline planning permission. Some can be a lot quicker, some can take several years. I mean, there are applications I'm aware of that have been in for maybe 3, 4, 5 years. There's always something that might hold you up. I think what we try and do is ensure that we've done all that due diligence before we put the application in. We do pre-application, so we have an initial discussion with the local planning authority before we put the planning application in, so that all these key issues are flagged at an early stage and we can deal with them before we get to the planning application stage. Ultimately, if you get frustrated with the local authority because obviously they're under pressure, they're not great in terms of having the resources to deal with things quickly. So if they do take longer than expected, you can take the decision out of their hands and appeal against non-determination. So if they haven't determined an application within, say, 13 weeks, you have the right to appeal. So you take the decision out of the local planning authority's hands and go to appeal. But again, that's quite a long, drawn-out process as well. So I think the bottom line is you have to be patient. It takes as long as it takes to get the right decision, which is ultimately what we try to do. We try to get a decision at a local level at all costs. We don't really want to be going to appeal because that is more cost and more delay. But ultimately, if that's the only option, then that's the route we have to take. But ultimately, we try and work with councils to get the right decision. And really, time is probably the second issue. It's about getting the right decision first and foremost. And so that's the way we tend to work.
Thanks, Dan. Phil, you're asking, if I sign a land promotion agreement, can I sell my land? Phil, simple answer to that question is yes, you can. You're just selling your land with the benefit of the promotion agreement, and therefore the incoming party, the new owner, needs to abide by the terms of the promotion agreement and adhere to it. So answer is yes, you can sell your land. Questions 15 and 16 were actually quite similar. So Ross and Evie, if you don't mind, Nick's going to answer both of them. So Ross, you've asked, I've heard one of the downsides of a promotion agreement is that you aren't the end house builder and councils prefer the certainty of knowing who is going to build the houses. Evie, you've asked, is signing up with a land promoter a better option than with a local or national house builder? Nick, can you tackle those? And if you don't mind, as swiftly as you can, because we're running out of time.
Thank you. Yes. So yeah, the point about deliverability, it's something I've certainly heard many times. What I would say in our experience is that when a promoter's selling a site to a house builder, invariably that house builder is buying the site unconditionally. So with that unconditional purchase, there is a need for a swift return on capital, which translates to them needing to build out the houses quickly. And as a company, we've got a demonstrable track record of selling sites to house builders who then very quickly go on to secure reserve matters approvals and with it start on site. I think with the Langford example Dan mentioned earlier on as one of the case studies, Bloor Homes got their reserve matters week before last, and speaking with the landowner yesterday on that, they're on site already putting the road in. So that is an example of a company who's outlaid money unconditionally and needs to see a return on capital of that money, which is a benefit of a promotion agreement to a local authority that ultimately, if they're granting planning permission on a site, they want to see houses built on that site in a timely fashion. I think Dan probably covered off the quality point with some of his earlier answers. And yeah, I think really it is in the gift of the local authority with design codes, conditions that can be attributed to an application. And yes, just on the last point, I'd probably say yes, as the price is determined following the price is market tested. Just very briefly, conscious we're almost out of time, but we've also had a number of questions come in throughout the process. I think Kimberly, you've asked a few. Been trying to monitor these as they come along. Interesting one about the Wychhaven example, which was, I'm just trying to find it. Do you work on an average density of housing? In the last example, 65 houses in 8 acres seems quite light. Were there specific challenges on the Honeybourne scheme that led to this? I think on that one, within Worcestershire, they actually have an expectation that 40% of any site is what they call green infrastructure. So that's public open space, essentially. So that was a factor there. Generally, as a rule of thumb, I would work on the basis of 30 dwellings per hectare net, up to 40 depending on sites, which translates to sort of 12 to 16 dwellings per acre. But you would always have, well, typically have 30 to 40% of a site as green infrastructure or open space, but net on a site 12 to 16 dwellings per hectare.
Great. Okay. Nick, were there any other questions from the audience there?
There were a lot. I was going to bowl you a quick swerveball to finish.
Right.
Which I think was Jason. Do you think, yes, this one's for you, Dan. Do you think development land tax is on the horizon? And if so, any ideas on how to mitigate it? Not sure you'll be able to answer the mitigation point, but is a development land tax on the horizon? It's probably an interesting one to finish on.
And Nick, which Dan? Oh, Dan.
Sorry, Dan O'Donnell. You can't swerve it that easily.
Okay. Well, Dan, you're about to start. Do you want to give your thoughts? I'll give mine.
I will do quickly. Yeah, I think. I mean, there already is in a way in terms of the community infrastructure levy and the Section 106 agreements that we already have to deal with, which is, I guess, effectively a sort of a roof tax. But yeah, the government is talking about overhauling that system. So I think there will be a new. I think it's just a national infrastructure levy to sort of based on the number of units, sort of a pro rata approach. But in terms of land tax, I guess that's a slightly different question, but that's from a planning perspective. So I'll hand that over to the other Dan.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. I think, in terms of mitigating against it, all one can do is keep fully abreast with the various government think tanks within this field. It's been muted for a long time. There's been various discussions about it. It does feel like something's on the horizon. I think it's just a case of keeping eyes wide open. But I am conscious of time, and we just have one more slide to wrap up, if that's okay, where we're going to be talking about Rosconn's key messages. So what would I like you to take away from today, other than we're a thoroughly nice bunch of chaps on this webinar? Rosconn's key messages: selling your land via a promotion agreement will maximize your return. Working with Rosconn Strategic Land to promote your land will cost you nothing. Entering into a land promotion agreement with Rosconn Strategic Land ensures that you, as the landowner, enjoy a trustworthy and transparent relationship that ensures no stone is left unturned. We operate throughout England. Should you have a land parcel or know someone who has, please do not hesitate to contact us, and we'd be delighted to provide, as my colleagues referred to earlier, a complimentary, absolutely no obligation site appraisal. Well, that brings us to the end of our first in the 4-part series of Ask the Land Promoter. Thank you all for attending, and I would like to give special thanks to Nick and Dan for assisting me on this webinar and coming along the journey with me. I think the three of us have to thank Dee, our colleague, who has been working very closely with Farmers Weekly and the team there to ensure that this event happens successfully, and to our marketing team, Stu and all of the team at Rapport. Just a reminder that the webinar will now be made available live on demand, and you will be emailed after the webinar. Any questions we didn't answer, we will answer offline. So don't worry, we haven't been avoiding you. It's just a case of time. We hope that you have enjoyed today's webinar. We hope you found it informative, interactive, and in parts amusing. We're trying to make this fun, so it's a good viewer. So it's good for you viewers. So with no further ado, I will say goodbye to you all. Thanks once again, and very much look forward to seeing you on our next webinar. Thank you.
Thank you.